Good day, and welcome to the VMS Software OpenVMS x86 Update webinar. My name is Terry Holmes, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. This is actually the 12th webinar that we've put on over the last few years, and I'm pleased to announce that it will be a part of a series of webinars specifically designed to provide you an update on our x86 progress as we continue to develop our products towards the production release late this year. Our guest for today will be our CTO, Claire Grant, who will be introduced momentarily. But we want to thank you for joining. We want to let you know that there are hundreds of people who are attending today's webinar from 5 different continents. So we are glad, especially for those in unusual time zones compared to where we are outside of the Boston, Massachusetts area in the United States. Thank you for your attending and for your interest in what we are doing here at VMS Software. Let's proceed. So I'd just like to review what today's agenda is. So if we could go to that slide.
Right. Something else I need to do here?
Yeah, we're still on the title slide.
Right, I know, I'm trying to move it. Oh, that's interesting.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay, so what today's agenda is, I'm going to be providing a brief business update. We try to do this with every webinar just to give everyone a sense for where VSI is from several aspects of our business, as well as the development of new products and services. Then we will turn the rest of the time over to Claire Grant. He was going to be talking about the x86 schedule, platform support, where things stand with the various compilers. And then at the conclusion of Claire's presentation and remarks, we will open it up for a Q&A session where on your screen, you should be able to click into a Q&A chat box, if you will, and you can ask questions as they come to you, or you can wait until the end. We will try to get through every question by providing an answer to every question during this webinar for the benefit of all those who are attending. So with that in mind, let me give you a brief business update. So a couple of things here that I think are important. First of all, it's good news that VSI has actually reported a positive EBITDA for the first time, and this was in our fiscal year 2020. Now, first of all, for those who are not familiar with the financial term, EBITDA is simply a way of measuring operating profit. It actually stands for, I believe, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, for those of you who are accountants or lovers of finance. So this is important from a couple of standpoints. First of all, our parent company, TerraCloud Corporation, has invested, as we've said before, tens of millions of dollars in acquiring the rights to allow VSI to develop new products and services. We purchased these rights from HP back in 2014, and in September of 2019 we made another acquisition where we purchased all of the support renewal contracts for HPE OpenVMS support contracts. So these were 2 major purchases, and so up until the end of last year, we had always reflected a negative profit or a negative EBITDA. Each year getting closer to the break-even point, but for the first time, we achieved a slight profit last year. So that's important, because that's important to our employees. That's certainly important to our parent company, TerraCloud. But it's also important to our customers to know that we continue to go on the right path from a business standpoint, and we can provide you from the long-term standpoint, the stability and the future products and services that that you look for. And that's our ultimate goal, is to be that solution provider to you long-term. So we want to thank you, those customers who have joined us, and those who are still looking at VSI. We encourage you to be in contact with us so we can get to know one another better and to help you. So to that point, in the second bullet point, since our last webinar in October of 2020, we have literally added hundreds of customers. And we are actually getting closer to 1,000 customers now, which is terrific news. And every day we're adding more and more customers. And much of those customers are from the new subscription licenses and support that we're offering. And some are simply just support contracts only for HPE version 8.4 or earlier contracts that companies wish to renew. So for those of you who want to look into the future and move forward, please, we welcome the chance to have these conversations with you, because we want to move forward with you and make sure your OpenVMS environment is vibrant, and as we continue to modernize. We've also made some additional product enhancements, and in fact, one announcement of a product called Service Control. It's basically a general consulting, it provides management availability for software running on OpenVMS clusters. And we actually purchased this product along with the PerfDeck product from HPE about 2 years ago. And we've just made some refinements, and we're starting to market the product. We've also made great progress in our open source updates. Updates made to Python and Open LDAP, SQL Relay, our new web UI, and Samba. So we're making great progress there, and we're excited about all those things. Finally, but not the least of which, we've made professional services expansions recently, and we plan on doing more by offering customers various types of core services, both in ways of general consulting and planning, things from as basic as installation services to managed services of your systems, in migration services, moving OpenVMS customers from one platform to another. And of course, with the x86 product coming out, as Claire is going to go into lots of details on, we anticipate that the customers will want to be guided in that process. And we have the capability, obviously, and we have the resources to help you with that. And of course, application services. With Brett Cameron and members of his team, we have the capability of providing you application services. So we just wanted to provide you that update. Things are looking very positive. And again, it's thanks to all of you customers out there and giving us feedback, making purchases, and things are really coming together, and we're very, very excited about the future. So now let me turn the time over to Clair Grant. Clair is one of the original founding members of VSI. He is our CTO, and as many of you know, he's been leading the x86 port effort for many years now. So Clair, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Terry. It seems hard to believe that it was 9 months ago since I last did this. So I went back and I started from there. What you see on this first slide is exactly what I said at the end of May in 2020. I didn't change a thing, but I did add what you see in red. I think we've had a really good year. Back 9 months ago, we looked at trying to roll out things, on a monthly basis, add a few more customers each time. We had to feel our way as to how many people we could support, how frequently we could get things out that had enough new content to make it worthwhile. And as we started to move along, it looked pretty good. So you may not think it's a big deal that we said we'd like to do 40 and we ended up with 41, but it really was, given that we were starting from scratch without a lot of history as to how quickly we can do things. So otherwise, there's nothing on this slide that has changed. And I think the way we've talked about things and our plan still continue to follow this course. So here's the timeline. You may, for those of you who will look at our website, you'll probably recognize this. It's down at the end of the update page. We moved pretty steadily, and you'll notice that the last edition over here is the H release that we are targeting for the middle of April. So I'd like to say just a little bit about how we got to where we are now. We moved pretty steadily, able to add a handful of users with each release, picked up a little steam in terms of the content of what was available, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And the thing I've added in this list on the left is what is beyond H. So you'll see publicly now that H is scheduled for the 14th of April, and we are now looking at the end of June for what we're going to change to 9.1, and I'll talk a lot about that difference in a few seconds. I suspect that the rollout of 9.1 will happen as we have been going along for the last 9 months. There'll be a -A, there'll be a -B. How many of those, I can't tell you right now. It depends on a lot of things. But you should continue to see regular rollouts of new releases with more capabilities in each. The bottom line on here, 9.2, I'd like to say a little bit about the rather wishy-washy Q4, Q1 unknown there. Moving to 9.1 is really important, but I'd like to stress something that is even more important right now. It doesn't matter whether you are a single consultant or an ISV or a partner of VSI, or you've got a 2-node cluster that runs a bunch of local hardware stores, or you're a worldwide brand name known to everyone. Getting 9.2 to the quality that we need, we can't do that on our own. It depends on customers using the product. So if there's anything you as an individual or a company can do that will get you to starting with 9.1 and giving us feedback, that is the best thing that can happen in order for 9.2 to be the quality that it needs to be. We need your help. So what just happened a week or so ago? We released what we call the G release. And for me, the big item was supporting VMware. A lot of this came together right in the last week or 10 days or so before our final build. And as we announced in G, we now support Fusion, which is on Mac OS, and Workstation Player, which is for Windows, and the ESXi, which we run on a couple of different hardware platforms ourselves. We've updated the cross tools, notably Linker and Analyze, but other things happen along the way as well. We made some improvements to traceback. Now, that may not seem like a big deal, but what happens when we announce a new release to the people who are participating, it's quite interesting to see how quickly some people come back to us and say, I'm up and running. And there'll be a small handful that will happen within hours. And one of the first people that got back to this time was someone who immediately said, I see traceback tells me more information this time. So a small thing here and there that helps somebody in this early stages is a good thing, and we appreciate the feedback. Another debugging tool that has come a long ways now is process dumps. Not perfect yet, I'll say more about that later, but another thing that helps people looking into problems and helps us. We now support reserved memory, system service intercept. We now have a DECset kit, and I want to emphasize this is now a PCSI kit. We can't exactly outlaw VMS install, but we try to replace it whenever we can. Kerberos from Open Source is now in this kit, and we have numerous updates for the standard things you would expect. The boot manager, deck threads, exception handling, and I could go on with this list here, but I just put that bottom bullet on there to emphasize that there is continuous progress being made on many fronts. So April, yes, we're supporting VMware in the G release, but it's limited to 2 CPUs. We discovered things right near the end of the G development cycle, and they've since been fixed. But we will be removing this 2 CPU maximum restriction that's in the configuration in G. We will be switching to our own new TCP/IP services. Initially, just telnet and FTP to replace the functions that are there today, but moving to our own product here, new product. Hoping to get the basic cross compiler in with the H release. There's nothing horrible about basic here, just someone had to be last on the list. We already know we have updates for C, Fortran, and macro compilers. There could well be more, but we have things in the pipeline right now to address some issues there. In the open source world, LDAP is planned to be added to the kit. One or more deck set tools will appear. I think MMS is next on the list. And process dumps currently in G do not support threaded applications, and that is planned for H. Addition of the parallel processing library, system service logging, and I'm sure this list will grow, but those are things that are in the pipeline right now and look pretty good for mid-April. So a few words about TCP/IP. This has been a long road, extremely bumpy too. We had to abandon something that we had worked on for a long time. Couple reasons. Technically, it just didn't turn out the way we had hoped. And customer feedback was not good. Also, some of the reasons that we did what we did were no longer stumbling blocks for us. So we started to start over again, pretty much. So we've taken some open source components, as you can see I've listed here, built and released them on x86, ported that to x86, and build and release in the H release in the middle of April. And given where we are right now, that April of minimum function, but being able to replace what is there now, looks fairly good. And we're pretty excited about that. So what's it mean to move to 9.1? And we're looking at the end of June for that. More than the content, it's the scope of the users. So far for the EAK, we had 75 people or so fill out a questionnaire and gave us some information. So we picked from a list of what I'll call volunteers, bleeding edge people. We know what they needed, and we knew what they could temporarily live without, because they told us. And it was fairly easy to balance what we had ready with what certain people needed. And you got a mail message from me that said, here's what's coming in the next release. Here's what you told us you needed. It looks like a pretty good fit. Would you like to have access to this next release? And I'd throw out, between 5 and 10 mail messages like that with each release. I'd get a bunch of replies back, and that resulted in the numbers I showed you on a previous slide. But there was no real guesswork here. We know what people wanted, what they were willing to live with, and it was easy to address that. The big difference from 9.1 is the scope. It will be open to all VSI customers and partners. This gets back to my previous statement on, we need help. Get involved early, and we're trying to make this as open and as wide spanning as we can. Of course, part of that is the system needs to be a little more complete than it is now. And as we have done with 9.0, that will happen in stages. There'll be an initial 9.1, just like there was a 9.0. Then there'll probably be an A and a B and a C and who knows what else. But we'll gradually move towards the complete environment. It won't all happen at once, and but we can't look stupid either. We have to get as many things in place that are universally used, and people will say, yeah, I'm ready to try that. So that's moving to 9.1 is twofold. It's increasing the scope of the users, and it's getting closer and closer all the time to a more complete system. This is a short list of things we have in progress now that are working towards some version of 9.1. We know a big stumbling block for people doing development is you don't have the use mode debugger yet. VAX, floating point data types, still an issue, and we know that that's true and in the works. A big component of what's coming next is getting to a new version of LLVM, our backend code generator, and I'll have more to say about that later. We know we have to get to support of bare metal, and what we have in the roadmap and in our plans right now is HPE's DL380. It's a popular platform in the field. We have some ourselves. It's a good starting point. Couple of other details here. Install/resident is not functional yet. It will be. The security server. This is one piece of our code that we are converting from ADA to C, and that's well on its way. For 9.0, there is no installation or upgrade procedure. We make available an appliance, an OVA file, and whether you're working on VirtualBox or KVM or VMware, you just import this appliance and there you have a running VMS system. We need to get to have real installation and upgrade, and in particular to support bare metal. And there'll be more network utilities as we progress with our continued work on our new TCP/IP stack. So I'd like to emphasize again, there's not going to be a single 9.1. It's going to come in phases, just as we have moved along with 9.0. And that's worked well, and I think it helps us as well as helps people in the field. Okay, platform support. Two categories here, of course, virtual machines and bare metal, and we'll take them separately. We're now supporting VirtualBox, KVM, and VMware. The VMware part really came together within 10 days of our making G available. There has been testing on VirtualBox, on macOS, Windows, and Debian, KVM, CentOS, Debian, VMware, Workstation Player, Fusion, and ESXi. And I'll say that all of those we do at VSI, with the exception of KVM on Debian. That's one of our 9.0 users. Got some great feedback there as well, as we do with any new platform. So pretty happy about where we are now in the hypervisor space. These last three bullets, if you've heard me speak in the past, you've all heard before, but they're just so true. It never ceases to amaze you how something can be so different that you would think would be almost identical. Every new machine, virtual machine, it's another platform to us and another thing that we know is going to be different. I was thinking the other day, for you American football playing fans, I mean, it's the Joe Namath quote. I guarantee it. They will be different. So we've had a lot of adventures with VMware, but at this point, we're in pretty good shape. So I thought I'd point out three things that we've run into along the way. the early boot path. This is what happens when you run into any new platform. If we can get beyond the physical configurations and get booted, we're in pretty good shape. You have to overcome getting the system up, and that's where problems almost always occur. When the system boots, if you run in a UEFI environment, that's the boot environment, you have, as an operating system, a UEFI application, which in our case is the boot manager. When you get to the end of what the boot manager normally does, there's this function you call called exit boot services. This is always an adventure, but it was particularly true on VMware. We've been running on VirtualBox and KVM forever, and yet we couldn't get hardly anywhere on VMware. And I want to point out this next bullet. We got some amazingly good help from one of the VMware developers in a public forum. We owe them big time. And what happened was, when you exit boot services, there's a whole bunch of things that pretty much at this point would get turned over to the operating system. VMware was really particular about things that what had happened so far in the boot manager either did or did not leave the current state of the system in. And once that became known, we did in fact have to rearrange some things and assumptions we had in our boot manager to sysboot transition. But all that got resolved. And then recently, once we got more serious about testing VMware, it wasn't obvious that VMware was going to be in the G release. We kind of forced that at the end, and it turned out to be good. Well, one of the things that got recognized very early was the time keeping was horrible. And the DCL wait command of 1 second took anywhere from 10 to 20 seconds, depending on a number of things, on both Fusion and Clair. And yet ESXi was fine. And here's one of those things you always have to remember. You're always at the mercy of what the software developers decided to do in their emulation. And what we ultimately discovered was on Fusion and Clair, you did not get a high precision event timer clock by default, like you do in ESXi. So our default position on that is the late pick timer, and evidently what we are doing in our interaction with that timer isn't working very well. I don't know whether that's us or them at this point, but right now it doesn't matter too much. We want HBAT anyway. But this was an interesting finding. But it's easily overcome, at least in our current implementation, is you just add something to the configuration file that forces HBAT, because they do provide it. It's just not the default. This is just another example of you can almost bet that there'll be something about timekeeping that will be different when you move to a new platform. The SMP one was even more interesting. We've been booting and running with two CPUs for quite a while and had just never gotten to the point of moving any further. So we discovered that you couldn't boot with more than 2 CPUs. And we got up a little ways, but not all that far. This was particularly problematic because as we started to debug it, the more debugging things we put in, took out, massaged, the problem didn't always seem to appear at the same time. Well, we finally narrowed that down to what was going on. And we discovered that there was a CPU waiting for an interrupt that never happened. Well, that now you get down to something you can actually deal with. In our boot path, we were doing something that had worked on other platforms but didn't work right now, and that was the use of APIC or APIC2. And as it turns out, we had one CPU in one mode and others in another mode. Now, way back when, we did that on purpose. But we've discovered that the answer is you've got to get everything synchronized. And now that we've done that, we're all fine. But it was an interesting discovery. So just as an example, this is a real cut and paste off a screen. This is the SXI running 64 CPUs. This is on a hardware platform that has 64 cores. And everything is up running just fine. Configurations are good. All the things you need to know are there. And here is those 64 CPUs running 300 processes. If you notice up at the top line, it shows system with all those processes who are in the state of current. That means they're running on a CPU right now. If you look at the line that says PID, process name, state, priority, IO, you'll see there's a column in there that doesn't have a heading between state and priority. That number, the 17, 39, 49, etc., that's the CPU number on which this process is running. I cut out a whole bunch of stuff so I could get this all in one slide, but this is everything going pretty much full bore. You'll notice down at the bottom it says total of 61 out of 93. The reason it's 61 and not 64 is when UETP starts up and gets everything running, some things start to end pretty quickly, and I just didn't happen to catch it in time. But I have seen all 64 working at once. So in one fell swoop, we went from running on 2 CPUs to 64 with no hitches in between. Very satisfying. So old news, haven't changed those 3 bullets forever. Intent is the same. We can only do so much. And a lot of what we do post 9.2 will depend on how much customer demand there is for things and how much we can actually do. The breaking news isn't exactly today or yesterday, but it's within a week or 10 days. Here was another real head scratcher. So we've got 3 hardware platforms that we're running on: the DL380 Gen 10, 380 Gen 9, and the DL580 Gen 10. So we booted and ran fine on number 1 and number 3, but not number 2. So think about that for a minute. DL380 Gen 9, fine. DL380 Gen 10, not fine. Okay, is it a Gen 10 problem? Well, no. DL580 Gen 10 is fine. DL380 Gen 10 is not. So that got to be pretty interesting. And what we're experiencing was during VMS startup, all of a sudden, the system, the platform would reset and you're back to square one. This was also pretty difficult to pin down as to where it was happening. But we did finally zero in on a particular instruction that was causing a page fault. The page fault was actually, I don't know what to call it, unresolvable, illegitimate, out of bounds, whatever the right term is there. But the CPU was asked to do something that it couldn't do, end of statement. And on the platform, on this platform, if you ask the processor to do something and 3 times in a row it can't, it's the 3 strikes and you're out rule, and the system resets. And that's what was happening. End of the story is that when the system comes up, there is this thing called the interrupt dispatch table, which for various reasons on other platforms, we had mapped into our own space and used our own copy of. This did not fly well on the DL380 Gen 10. And long story short here, we need to use what the system gave us. And the mapping that we had done was no longer necessary. I hope I have that in the right order. But this was an extremely aggravating problem for a long while, but finally got resolved. So another example of every new thing you try to run on there's going to be something in getting the system up and running. So let's move on. Compilers. This is what everybody wants to know, right? When are we going to have native compilers? I hate terrible answers, but be patient, I think, is the best thing we can say right now. And I'll try to explain why. The current LLVM that we are using, our backend code generator, is really old. It's the one we started with. We need to get up to date for any number of reasons. The problem for us is that LLVM is written in C++. As you probably know, if you've been participating in any of these conferences and 9.0, we don't have a C++ cross compiler. And there's another dozen reasons for that, but let that aside for the moment. We need to get a native LLVM onto x86 before we can have native compilers. So the process is, we are currently, this is in the works. We are currently compiling the LLVM modules on Linux, bringing them to an Itanium system and using our cross linker for them, and moving the resulting libraries to x86. That gives us an LLVM and its libraries. Well, okay, that's part one. We have to add VMS specific changes to this now new LLVM. We've made some additions to LLVM in the course of getting to the compilers that we have today. A gross oversimplification is there are just a lot of places where we have to make LLVM do what GEM does. There's more to it than that, but that gives you kind of a basic idea. Then we have to get the front ends of the compilers to x86. And then we have to port the open source C++ Clang to VMS. It's a guarantee that not all native compilers will appear at the same time in 9.1 releases. They will make their way in as we progress through a 9.1, an A, B, C, or whatever. It looks like Xmacro will probably be first, but no predictions as to the sequence of compilers after that. That may depend a lot on customer feedback and the order in which things happen. And when we first have native compilers, they will not be optimized. So there's a long way to go here, but it's all in the works. Okay, C++ is different, as I described before. It, in and of itself, is a big job to port it to VMS. And here are a few of the reasons why. Needs to know about command line. Needs libraries, listing file, VMS file specs, pointer construction, header changes, condition handling, and this list, I'm sure, could be 3 times as long. So there's LLVM, which is a huge job in itself, and then there's Clang, which is another huge job in itself. So predicting when these things will happen right now, impossible. But we are on the way, and once we get out to 9.1 with lots of people, we'll progress through them as well as we can. I'm sorry, but you can't schedule anything around these very much right now. Okay, I thought I'd try to anticipate a few simple questions and get them out of the way early. RDB and VMS, we can't speak for Oracle, only they can talk to that. I mean, I'm perfectly comfortable in saying we know they're working on it because we talk to them all the time. But a schedule, that's not up to us to say. Hyper-V, yes. Once we get a little further along here, I'm not saying it will be in 9.2, but it's the next hypervisor on the list whenever we get started on it. And we've poked at it a little bit already. Hardware platforms. The DL380 is an Intel-based system. There are AMD-based systems. There are Dell systems. There are other HP platforms. It's hard to see what would come next and when, but hardly anything is even possible, we think, at this time, other than the DL380 for 9.2. Will it be a binary translator? We have no plans right now for translating either alpha or I64 images. Performance of VMS and x86, no idea. And it's not worth thinking too hard about until we have native optimized compilers. So I thought I'd throw out a few questions there that we get all the time. Let's get them out of the way first. So at this point, Terry, I think we're ready for Q&A.
Thanks, Claire, so much. We have a few questions, but folks who want to enter a question, please do so now. Before we get to those, I do want to make a short announcement. And thanks to a few of you who have sent some messages to us. There seems to be a technical difficulty for some people able to enter into the webinar. Occasionally this does happen, but I believe this is more broad-based than I've ever seen on one of our webinars. So if you have a colleague who is indicating they are having trouble joining, I see a couple of messages say that the conference is full. First of all, we apologize. It sounds like it could be an issue with our provider, because about 12 months ago, we significantly increased the capacity for these webinars exponentially. And of course, everyone should have registered and received their confirmation to their registration. So we will apologize ahead of time. This is being recorded, but we will consider actually redoing this live again very soon, because we know that the Q&A portion of these events is very important for specific questions and specific answers being given to customers. So with that, we apologize. So, but let's Claire, let's go right into some of the Q&A here.
Terry, I'd like to add one thing if I could.
Please.
For anyone listening today who has participated in one of the 9.0 EAKs, a big thank you to all of you.
Great, thanks, Claire. Okay, let's go through a few questions. The first one is, how about the HPE Apollo server based on Intel? Would that be a future target? And I know you kind of addressed this, but
right. I mean, people are going to have questions about every piece of hardware you can think of. And
right.
Really, we don't have a plan. There could be any number of things that could happen. We're just not trying to predict or promise anything beyond 9.2.
Okay. What is the minimum ESXi CPU platform supported?
Minimum platform. In terms of, I don't know that there is a minimum. I mean, if ESXi runs on it, I don't see why we wouldn't at some point. I mean, we run ESXi ourselves on 2 different servers. One of them's got 4 cores, the other one's got 64. So,
okay.
If someone wants to further refine that question, send it to us.
Send it to us. Yeah, absolutely. Next question, has the problem with TOY on system resumption in VMs been corrected?
Oh, this is a bit of a controversial question here. I'm gonna make a guess. Is what really being asked here. If you suspend a virtual machine and come back 3 hours later, do you want the time to reflect how long the system has actually been up and running VMS? Or do you want to subtract out the time that it was suspended? I mean, that's one part of this question, I'm sure. We haven't pursued it yet, but we know there are issues with what we have now because we've been told VMware doesn't do it that way. So yes. Can I answer the question specifically? The answer is probably no, because we haven't addressed anything in those lines, but we know it's coming and we have to.
I have a follow-up question from the earlier question on, I'll just ask it. Will it run on Xeon E5-2670 version 2 like in DL380 Gen 8 running ESXi 6.7?
Well, you said the magic word at the end.
Yeah.
We don't run on Gen 8 because that was, you have to be Gen 9 or better because that's when UEFI became the boot path.
Okay, I think you've probably covered this next one in some ways, but let's be, maybe we can help this individual a bit more pointed. When will we be able to get our hands on x86 to, quote, play with? A lot of potential adopters rely on resellers to test and trial, etc. I think the answer is, you know, in this case, to Brian, if you have parties who are interested in it, just send us an email saying you're interested. We send you out a survey and then complete that survey, return to us, and that goes to the Clair and his x86 team for evaluation, and they will advise.
Well, true, that's the way it will work until the end of June. But when 9.1 happens, it's open to anybody. And then that's in your ballpark at that point, Terry. But as long as we're in the 90G and H time frame, get a questionnaire and send it to us.
Yep. In fact, Claire, you may want to. I know on the last slide of the slide deck is one of our email addresses where people can make those requests to. So we may want to just have that up. Thanks. Let's see. Okay, while you have the porting team in place, will you do a ARM port?
That's way beyond anything we could even possibly think about right now.
Okay, fair enough. I would like to test a OpenVMS x86 port in a virtual environment. How would I go about doing this?
Fill out the questionnaire.
Yeah, I think we've covered that. Where can we access the recording of this webinar? The recording will be available on our website. Typically is about a 48-hour business turnaround, so I would say by next Monday we'll be up on our website. However, as indicated, because of some technical difficulties, we will probably do this again live in the near future.
So let me say one more word about the questionnaire. It could save some people some time here.
Sure.
Right now, with 9.0 G and about to be H in the middle of April, there's no C++ compiler. We don't support real hardware. Just a couple of things that are bottlenecks for people. So if you absolutely need C++, or you can't run in one of the virtual environments, you know, you're out of luck at this point.
Okay, next question, which is not necessarily directly related to x86, but we have OpenVMS 8.4-2L1 and an Oracle client to access external database, Oracle. Is SQL Relay support access to this kind of database? Is it right that Oracle will stop development on its Oracle client?
I'll hand this off to you. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So we know that from an announcement from Oracle at the end of last year that the support for the Oracle product will continue, I believe, again, please check with Oracle on this. We don't want to speak for Oracle, but I believe through the end of this year, and then after that, it will be basically a best effort or L1, L2 workaround basis for the next several years after that. I'm not positive where things stand with the Oracle client, but I believe that was going to be the same case with the Oracle client. So I would suggest in this case that Eve, if you would write an email to the address on the screen, info@vmssoftware.com, we will get you a more specific answer. Next question, Claire, it seems like, sorry, the screen's jumping. Enterprise version of ESXi is needed to get to the virtual serial console. Any thoughts of what can be done to remove the need for the serial port access for the console?
Need for this. Well, you always have to have a console interface for VMS. The serial port, eliminating that. I'd have to think about that. I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
Okay. Here's another question about the x86 questionnaire. Again, send an email to us at info@vmssoftware.com and you will get one. That will start the process. Question from, is the C++ compiler also the C compiler?
That's an excellent question. What you will end up with on x86, yes, Clang will compile C++ and C. But we will also have what I'm going to call the DEC compiler, like we have on 9.0 right now. So if there are things that you require that have entered into the DEC language over the years that aren't immediately in Clang, you can use the DEC compiler as well. So yes, Clang will do C and C++.
Okay. Any plans of success with getting VMS running on QEMU/KVM, not just ESXi?
Oh, we support KVM today.
Yeah.
Have for a long time.
Okay, I'm just checking for.
Well, I think I had this in the slide, but we run KVM on CentOS. We have a customer who runs KVM on Debian.
Okay, here's a question about the presentation for today. Is it downloadable? Yes, it will be downloadable. At the same time, the recording goes up on our website. Question about Intel CPU and AMD CPU. I think that Claire, you've pretty much addressed it, but you may want to cover it again. I'll read the specific question. Do the portion in the x86 world testing and develop on Intel CPU only? What about AMD CPU?
So far, we've only tested on the DL380, which is Intel. We have not tested anything on the DL385, which is AMD.
Okay. Have Oracle given any indications on a x86 port? Not that they are doing well on i86 new ports. Claire, do you want to comment from a technical standpoint? And I can maybe comment from the commercial or business side.
Well, again, not trying to speak for Oracle, but when you go into any of the Oracle presentations that I've seen or been part of over the last 2 or 3 years, Kevin Duffy always talks about them working on the RDB port.
Yes, exactly. As I think many folks know, we've partnered both technically and from a marketing standpoint with Oracle many times. So we have a very good relationship with them, and They certainly seem to be pointed in that direction, but again, go to Oracle for the official statement. Will Clang support qualifiers to restrict the language for to ANSI C? I'm not quite clear on that one, but
Well, yeah, I have no idea.
yeah, okay.
Send that in and we'll get it to the right person.
Yep. What is the likely timing to be for the native DEC compiler compared to native Clang? Quote, I will probably go with whatever comes first.
This is where we will probably we'll make some priorities because we need to get C++ out there. So we could probably do other things sooner, but this is going to be an all hands on deck at some point to get C++ out there. So my guess is it will be first.
Okay, thanks, Claire.
But that's kind of a guess on my part.
Mm-hmm. Are VSI looking to existing clients only or gaining traction in the new user base? How will it be pushed or marketed? If a new user base is being sought, I imagine this will be the way after native compilers are working. Well, let me comment on that, and then Claire, if you want to add to it, that'd be great. So obviously, the easiest way to attract new customers or attract new business is to go to your current customer base and the current OpenVMS marketplace. So that certainly is what we're counting on and planning for the next few years. That's where the majority of the x86 business will be coming from. Is for many of you who have planned it for quite some time, who it's been talked about for maybe a couple of decades now, but it's actually coming to fruition now. So that is clearly our focus for the x86 product. We have had a small number of inquiries for people who are not presently using OpenVMS, which are quite interesting. But we think that the current customer base and being able to expand the OpenVMS presence through our x86 product in current customers' IT infrastructure is definitely a possibility and definitely where we're headed with this in the short term. Claire, I don't know if you want to comment beyond that.
No, I don't have anything to add there.
Okay. Just for clarification, you mentioned support of the ESXi environment. I'll get that down yet. Is that only on the HP server or will it include Dell ESXi servers?
I hadn't really thought too much about that. I don't know the answer. All I know is we have only run so far on HP Intel.
Okay.
But on the one hand, you say, well, it's ESXi, it should run anywhere. Well, don't ever forget, every new platform environment is different. So will it someday? I don't know. We just haven't done it yet, that's for sure.
Thanks, Claire. Is there an estimate of when the community license program will extend to x86? After we release the version 9.2 of x86, I think then we'll tackle the community license program and extending x86 there. Okay, a bit off topic. But what is the status of VMS 8.4-2L3 and updated TCP/IP? Security has been increased and scanners are finding vulnerabilities. 8.4-2L3, the last time I heard, was going to be available at the end of this quarter, probably March 30th or April 1st. That was the time frame. I believe that's still the time frame. In terms of updated TCP/IP, That I'm not sure of. I don't know. Claire, do you happen to?
Sorry, I can't add to that.
Yeah, no problems. I can see who's written the question, and we'll go ahead and direct that, get you a direct response on that one. So thank you. Any other questions that folks have? Well, apparently not for right now. So again, we want to thank you for your participation in this webinar. We will, oh, no one just came in. Are there any plans for porting seminars? I'm not quite clear. I'm not quite sure I understand that question.
I think I do.
You do? Go ahead.
I'm probably not the right person to be answering. But yes, we are talking about porting seminars, places for people to go either on the network or something we provide, so where they can play around a little bit. Yes, it may not be a direct answer to that question, but we're trying to think about ways for people to both get help and get an environment where they can do some work.
Great. Yep. Thank you, Claire. I think I understand now. If there are different Q&As in the second live presentation, will they be recorded? Yes. Again, we apologize to those who have, for some reason, been blocked out of this webinar, but we will investigate what the cause is and make sure that we address it appropriately. Any other questions? Okay, well, again, we want to thank all those who have been able to participate, and apologize for those who, for some reason, cannot. You can't hear me, but we'll address that. And again, this is the first of a series of regular x86 update webinars, which we'll plan on holding. The next one will be towards the end of April. And again, as you can see, we're making a lot of progress, and Claire and the team this is really happening. So we're very excited about this, as well as some of the other things that we've talked about today. Thanks again for your participation, and we'll see you during the next webinar, if not sooner.
Get involved and help us.
That's right. Okay. Thanks again, and we'll sign off for now. Bye-bye.